Hey guys, Mike here. I wanted to thank every one of you that have left me a review so far. All of you that have messaged me a copy of your review should have received your keychain by now. So if you haven't, please reach out to me via email. My email is roadstoriespodcast@gmail.com. I will get that keychain out to you ASAP. And if you haven't left a review, head on over to iTunes or wherever you listen to the show and let me know how I'm doing. Reviews help the show get discovered, and more importantly, they let me know if you're enjoying the content. In other news, I have decided to consolidate my social media into one account. So from now on, make sure to follow me at Road Stories Mike on Instagram. So without further ado, please enjoy my interview with Bring a Trailer co-founder Randy Nonnenberg. Enjoy.
My name is Randy Nonnenberg, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of BringATrailer.com. Bring a Trailer is an online marketplace for buying and selling interesting vehicles. I started it with a friend from college in 2007. We turned it on as a simple blog site way back then where I would find interesting vehicles that were being sold all over the internet and sort of curate and talk about the special ones. That evolved over the years into a marketplace platform where once audience members wanted to sell their cars on BAT, and eventually we evolved that yet again into a auction platform in 2014, which started with 3 cars in a week and now has boomed and is now over 200 cars are being listed on BringATrailer.com every single week.
You're in the Bay Area right now?
I'm in San Francisco. Yeah, I'm at Bring a Trailer's office, which is here in the Mission District in San Francisco.
The greatest burritos on the face of this planet, Mission District.
About 3 blocks from here is what is claimed to be the best burrito in the world. We like it.
Every person, for the most part, on this show has had a pretty significant history with cars. What was Randy Nonnenberg doing when he was a kid when it came to cars? Or was Randy Nonnenberg just not interested in what Four Wheels had to offer?
No, I'm one of those where I was pretty much interested in cars from the get-go. I'm very lucky being the only son of my parents that I spent a lot of time with my dad in the garage doing car things. He had restored a few interesting cars, kind of dabbled in cars before I came along, and then I came along, and it was one of the ways that we spent a ton of time together, and frankly still do. My dad and I still do car events and rallies and all sorts of things these days. But yeah, it started very early for me. I grew up in California, and then we actually moved over to Germany. We lived in Germany when I was very young. Nonnenberg, you can tell from my last name, is a German last name. And so I always had a dream that I wanted to work in the German car business because Porsche and Mercedes and BMW sort of, hypnotized me as a child. Those were the things on my walls as a kid. Started with, like everybody, model cars, RC cars, moved into starting to, clean and wrench on dad's cars. Got my own first car when I was, 14, which was a Toyota FJ40 Land Cruiser. And I mean, it was kind of off to the races after that.
What possessed you to get an FJ40 as a 14-year-old?
Yeah, well, I mean, back then they were cheap. It's really funny. Nowadays, they're all fancy and expensive. Back then, that was one of the cheapest ways to get into cars is get a truck of some sort. I remember vividly my first one, and bought out of a print classified ad in the Auto Trader, which we all went and rode our bikes to 7-Eleven to go read every week. So anyway, that in California, growing up in Northern California, I always thought the coolest thing was 4-wheel drives and trucks. You could drive around with the top off of them in warm weather. That left Broncos, Scouts, CJs, and FJs being at the sort of front of the list. And I loved FJs the best out of those 4. So I bought one and have owned some sort of a Toyota Land Cruiser ever since to present day.
So let's fast forward a little bit to your college days. You went to Stanford, then you went to Haas Business School, but somewhere in the middle there, you worked as an intern/engineer. So explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so I graduated in engineering. Always liked the sciences, math and science, and and knew that I wanted to work on sort of the technical side of the car world. And so I actually interned during the summers in college in Germany. I was really lucky to study overseas and then work at Audi in Germany and then BMW in Germany. Those were some of my dream sort of summers that I look back on really fondly. And getting to be part of those companies that I had only read about, and gone to museums for, to be sort of behind the curtain and seeing what's going on in those companies was amazing. And yeah, that sort of catapulted me to being able to get a job at BMW out of college, which was really special, and let me work at their sort of technology scouting office in Palo Alto, not far from where I went to school.
Gotcha. So expand a little bit on that technology scouting thing. What does that mean? Because it's a car company, and obviously you're in Silicon Valley. Go in a little bit more detail as to what that actually means.
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people don't know that many of the manufacturers from all around the globe have sort of outposts in Silicon Valley. And those are there to kind of forge partnerships with different tech startups and people sort of coming up with the next wave of interfaces and things for in vehicles. Nowadays, that has evolved to Tesla and more electric vehicle type stuff. That wasn't really as much of the push back then. It was more the behind the scenes and driver sort of cockpit electronics that were going into cars quite a bit, and this is in the year 2000, 2001. So anyway, yeah, it was a terrific time. BMW was very cutting edge at that moment. They were producing awesome things in the, my favorite 7 Series was just coming off the line at that point, and there was a good fleet of cars we got to drive around, and I got to go back and forth to Germany and do some fun things and work on some really neat projects. And it led to a eventual 10-year run for me at BMW.
Talk to me a little bit about what it meant for you to become an engineer, because that's such a broad thing. You could be an engineer of so many different things, even within a car company. What did you want to achieve as an engineer when you went to school and after you went to school and after you went to go work for BMW? What was like the ultimate goal, I guess?
The ultimate goal within the engineering realm would have been to work either, in the performance division or the racing division or some sort of overall higher level, meaning broader engineering component. Whether the scary part of big car companies is they have engineers that can work all day on like a door handle for their entire career. And that wasn't something that was stimulating to me. I always wanted to steer into something that was sort of performance and oriented and exciting, because that's the kind of stuff that made me want to work for those brands to begin with. So that's a tricky thing to navigate within a bigger company. And you mentioned the kind of cars we list on BAT, and something that was always going on in the back of my head, even when I was there and doing different sorts of roles at BMW. The favorite job in the whole company that I always was after was working for, Mobile Tradition in some way, which is their sort of historic arm of the company, which does a lot with heritage and the vintage vehicles and restorations and stuff like that. Those jobs are very limited and hard to get, as you might imagine. And that's sort of something, the difficulty with moving forward into that realm and seeing a career path there is kind of what led to wanting to start something else in BAT.
Getting wrapped up in new stuff is pretty easy, especially because technology kind of makes it easy because it can be fun. But with you, and it looks like there's some rollover with BAT, it seems like you're a little bit more enthused by the older stuff. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah, I had an interesting mix of that. The new stuff coming out was really neat, particularly at that time. But I had always had my hands on, right? I drove a 1972 BMW to college. And I had always had my hands on the vintage stuff and really loved that part of things. For better or worse, I've always been sort of an old car guy. But for whatever reason, that drew me in. So many people just gravitate back towards the cars that were sort of on their walls as a kid, the stuff that they saw on the street when they were in high school and wish they had a pocketbook where they could go buy a new car, but they couldn't. And so that has sort of always dictated a lot of the era of cars that a lot of people like, and myself included, right? I mean, now I'm sitting here in the garage with a 1987 BMW and a 1993 Toyota pickup, and the kind of stuff that was driving around when I was younger and could never have afforded this stuff when it was new. But now these are sort of enthusiast cars that people dig from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and into 2000s as almost a vintage item, even though it was made not that long ago.
So you mentioned that there were quite a few other car makers in Silicon Valley. Why stick to BMW?
BMW is a great company. Cool product, really engaging, really interesting. Their headquarters in Munich is such a cool place. I probably could have branched out and, tried for some others, but had a great relationship with them, had a terrific internship year in Munich, working at the M division there, doing things with engines and just like some of my most formative automotive experiences. And they treated me really well, and I really enjoyed being there, and the people were great, and it made for a great, sort of dream job scenario straight out of college to go to get to work for that company and get to live in California while you're doing it. So it was a great thing to hang on to.
So when you became employed by BMW, you became a field service engineer. What does that mean?
I was basically out in the field supporting new product that would roll out from a technical perspective, and making sure that we figured out what the actual customer experience was like for people taking delivery of new BMW products. And I was based out of San Francisco and covering territory, west of the Rockies. So flying around to different dealerships, to customers, to events, representing the company, and gathering information from a technical perspective.
To say that your taste in cars is eclectic is probably an understatement, going from FJs to Datsuns to everything kind of in between. Help me understand what's going on in your head when you want to buy a car.
That's a good observation. So, the website reflects this. My personal collection of cars reflects this, and I have always just thought that the variety of interesting cars is kind of what makes cars so cool, right? All sorts of different people, all sorts of different vehicles, different eras, different, countries that they come from, great condition, terrible condition, project, Concord, all this stuff. That sort of variety and complexity is just what makes the whole car universe so fun and interesting. So you see that on the website, right? We'll feature like a $4,000 Datsun, and then we'll feature an $80,000 Porsche and everything in between, and all over the place. And trucks. I love four-wheel drives, but I also love cars that are run at the track. So, it's that sort of, I kind of joke that it's a little bit, my taste is sort of schizophrenic. People say, hey, what's your one dream car? And I'm like, oh man, my dream car is not some $200,000 one car that I keep for the rest of my life. My dream in cars is a revolving 5-car collection of all sorts of stuff, because then you get to drive everything under the sun, which is kind of the dream. So, it's not a singular, one. I'm not a one vehicle type of guy. There's a lot of specialists out there, and I love taking cars to those people so they can work on them, because that sort of specific ability is and experience is fantastic in cars, and wrenching on them and fixing them. But to get to own, I want to own everything under the sun, so I will never be able to pick just one.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to have to agree with you on that. But let's talk a little bit about BAT, because when you first started it, you started posting, and it turned into the auction house after a while. But you're in the Bay Area, so I'm thinking that there's possibly some kind of influence from the tech community there to make it the most addictive website on the face of this planet. Was there an element of that built in, or how did that happen?
That's honestly, it's been a byproduct of how it has come together. We really started it. It wasn't, as you mentioned, like a plan to start an auction. It wasn't even a plan to start a marketplace. There wasn't even really a business plan. It was more just an outlet to start talking about all these cars that I would find that were amazing. And it's like, I didn't think anybody was going to find them unless you could post them somehow or some way. And they're, given the variety of the stuff that I would search for and find, it's not like you can go to one forum, the Alfa Romeo forum, and post all these cool BMWs and trucks and other stuff that I was finding. So there was no, at that time, there was no sort of more general, interesting car destination online. And so start writing about all this different sort of stuff. And then you naturally bring in enthusiasts from all those lines. And so then it turns out that mix and that variety is what a lot of other people liked and were also out digging around for. And the ability to sort of just post the sort of things that I liked, as it turns out, really resonated with many, many people, and still does. And it's just sort of a phenomenon. The addictiveness of it. When a new thing comes up that has been vetted is very different than when just a random thing comes up on a more volume-based and easier access marketplace where just sort of any junk can be there. On BAT, when something comes up, it's going to be interesting. So it makes it like, oh, wow, what's the next thing going to be on BAT? And so it turns out that is the sort of dynamic that established itself in the early days of BAT and has stuck with it ever since.
So let's talk about the origination of BAT, because it sounds like you just wanted to share these cars. Why did you want to start Bring a Trailer? You were working for BMW. It sounds like you were having a great time there. They were treating you right. Why do it?
That's a good question. There's something addictive about posting something on a blog. There's some reason all these people post their photos to Instagram. There's something about, posting content that strikes a chord in people. And for me, this is sort of my specialty and my passion and my main area of expertise, and talking about these cars. And you talked about sort of where it came from. And I grew up reading classified ads in the newspaper, like for fun, for sport, which is super weird, right? Like that's like a lot of people didn't do that. But like my favorite thing was to get the classifieds out in the San Jose Mercury News and like page to the back and not read any real stories, but go straight to the classifieds, and do the same thing in Auto Week, and do the same thing in car magazines whenever I could. So that sort of thing, that energy has sort of always been something that I've been excited about, and finding a way to channel that has for whatever reason become something that was a motivator. And that's what you need at the beginning. But like with any blogger or content producer or whatever, once you start putting it out there and you start to get a response from people, then it becomes really interesting, because then it's people are commenting about what you're writing, and people are corresponding with you, and people are sort of have an expectation that there's going to be something tomorrow, and all sorts of different dynamics start to come into play from a sort of psychological component. And for whatever reason, I was able to start it up and go for the first 4 or 5 months just talking to myself, nobody really caring. And then it started to gain some sort of traction, and people started to want to talk about it. And then it was like, oh, wow. And then once a few people have it, and we were able to engineer some features where they could share it really easily and start their day with it, with the BAT daily email, then it kind of went nuts at that point. And then you have a really viable audience. And at that point, it gets really fun to start creating the content for them.
Was Bring a Trailer the original name, or was there something prior to that?
No, that was the first name, the first URL we got, my buddy Gentry and I, that I started it with, right? I mean, we still have saved that email chain about ping-pong names back and forth, like what URL do we get for the blog? There are a bunch of terrible names. And Bring a Trailer has always been sort of a funny one. Some people get it, and some people kind of scratch their head and are like, do you sell trailers, or what are you guys doing? But like I said, so many years reading classifieds, like back in the day, the lady selling her deceased husband's like Barracuda in her garage that had been sitting forever, literally in the ad, it would say, this car is this much money, bring a trailer, come pick it up. And that was sort of a buzzword in those. And we kind of get the sort of acknowledging nod from people who remember that from back in the day. That's put in ads less so now. And also it's sort of, our brand is out there and people know it. So people say it in the context of our auctions a little bit now, but that used to be in so many advertisements I remember back in the day, and that's where the name came from.
Yeah, it makes total sense. You buy a car and you bring a trailer if you want to trailer it back. And to me, that name makes more sense for an auction site like yours rather than a blog. So it was still completely coincidental?
It's pretty perfect. It makes sense to a lot of people. I'll tell you, man. I mean, you're really latching onto it and getting it, but there are some people that are like, "Tell me about the name. I don't get it." Right? I mean, you have to walk them through it, and then still sometimes people kind of walk away going like, kind of wondering what's up or what we're thinking. But anyway, that's sort of a side story. But no, we didn't engineer that to be like, oh, this is going to be a big marketplace. It was what similar to the cars that are on the site. Something that's always been important to me is that what I touched on earlier is that, an inexpensive car or a project is just as cool and interesting to read about as a perfect, shiny show car. And so the nuance and the sort of almost irony around the name is that you bring a trailer for a piece of junk, but you also bring a trailer for a perfect race car or show car that costs $1 million, right? So the name is sort of universal across the landscape of different types of cars, and you can bring a trailer for all of them, right? So it's a name that I thought just sort of fit the kind of stuff I wanted to start writing about.
So there's the writing aspect and then there's the technical aspect, and I'm talking more so about the coding. And I hate to consistently refer back to the Bay Area. It's not like the area makes you, but I'm sure it has some influence. Did you study coding?
No, I mean, frankly, there hasn't been a lot of coding from me, thankfully. The site wouldn't work very well if there was. It's the partnership and how this came about is through a buddy of mine that I went to school with who was and is in the tech world. And he was sort of the tech brain. We're sort of the yin and yang, he's sort of the tech and vision and knew how to work with digital tools. And I was the sort of automotive side who would understand the automotive market and environment and audience. And we, you can't really do this with only one of those. There are car people who have tried to program websites and the websites look terrible. And there are tech people who try to fake that they know about cars and it doesn't work with car people. So we were really lucky that we kind of put our heads together and leverage both of our skill sets, and it ended up with a website that works pretty well and some neat content on there.
You put some years into writing about cars and posting them onto your beloved site. What happened that prompted you to create a platform where you can now sell cars?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really happened from submissions from the community. So we grew as just this blog and talking about cars that were out there, and obviously a lot of experts and non-experts and enthusiasts and all sorts of people started to discover the site, and the daily email in particular started going out to thousands of people at 5 a.m. every morning, and they wanted to see what are the latest sort of things that BAT has found. And then we'd start to get a lot of people replying to that email saying, hey, I have one of these for sale, or hey, I've got a car for sale. I was thinking of putting on some other forum. Would you list it on Bring a Trailer? That was the true light bulb moment. And at the beginning, we'd had no infrastructure in place for that. Like, how do you sell things on a blog? Like, what do we do? Like, can we charge for this? And we had to sort of put our heads together and be like, well, it'd be great if people would sell stuff on BT. So the sort of light bulb went off that, oh, wow, this is going to potentially be a marketplace where people want to sell and buy. And because people were already doing the buying, right? They were finding a car on BAT, but then they'd link over to eBay or Craigslist or a dealer or an auction or whatever. But all these people were kind of showing up with an interest in buying, and we would get many success stories from them that, hey, I found this car in BAT and thanks guys for finding it. And now I have it and it's great. Obviously that big pool of buyers became very attractive for people that had cars and wanted to sell them. So they said, hey, let me sell it on BAT. So that was the moment. And then we sort of decided to grab onto that and build it out.
So what's the timeline here from the start of the site to actually making it a business?
We turned on the site in 2007 and we're kind of playing around. I mean, everything was very ad hoc. And then 2010 is when both Gentry and I kind of looked at each other and were like, oh, this is a real a real thing. Let's make it a marketplace. And we both left our day jobs and decided to go after it.
At the time that you were starting this whole thing, the internet was kind of the Wild West when it came to buying cars, and it still kind of is. There are a ton of sites, but they essentially all do the same thing, and if it's an auction, it's a very impersonal experience. All of them are actually very impersonal, and they're terrifying, to me at least, because you don't really have the opportunity to see the car in person. And that is a terrifying experience to me because you can't really see what's wrong with the car. Was that something that you guys considered when you decided that the site was going to be an auction site?
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping ahead to sort of how the auctions work and what the attributes of that we wanted. I mean, when we started thinking about even just the fixed price marketplace that we had before the auctions, the whole thing came about because we just sort of, from a blue sky perspective on a blank whiteboard, we said, how would we like to buy a car and how would we like to sell a car? And like, what are all these shortcomings of all these other marketplaces, right? They're to your point, the internet is scary. Used car salesmen have a terrible reputation, and most of that is well earned. Cars, any car that was made 30 years ago can be wonderful or can be fraught with all sorts of problems. And how do you see them and find them? And this community that we sort of curated by featuring interesting listings of cars, people would all talk about the cars and the good parts and the bad parts, and how does this look like one to buy or one to avoid? And we realized that a open discussion like that can really assist a buyer in terms of knowing what to do about buying a car or not, and having that ability to have an open microphone. It's on every single listing is really different than what's out there, right? You see an eBay listing or a car listed wherever, and it's like 5 sentences from the seller, and that's all you get, right? And you can maybe call the seller, but what else are you going to do? And a lot of people want to call an expert. And on BAT, you can sort of post a question, or you can, nudge somebody who has sold a similar car, or do all sorts of things. And there's just an organic conversation happening around cars that enthusiasts want to chat about the good and bad of cars. And it turns out that's a super important part of engaging and buying a car. And I think it's a necessary part. Unless you're the expert on Porsche 911 SCs, just taking the seller's word for it, with no community interaction and not being able to contact the seller if you're at a big auction house. It always shocked me that you'd go buy a car that rolls across the auction tent and the auctioneer has a fancy tie on, but won't tell you anything about the car and won't tell you who the owner was. And you just it's a very blind, scary experience. But to be able to contact the seller and ask a community of thousands of watchers about a car is a really special thing.
Let's talk a little bit about the car selection process, because you guys are killing it on selecting some really fun stuff. But I want to go back to how you guys started with selecting the cars, because it's really easy to, especially when you're starting something up, to just kind of go, all right, well, I'm going to grab everything and let the market dictate what's fun and what's not fun. But it doesn't sound like you did it that way. So tell me about how your idea evolved.
The curation and the selection of the car has always been something super important on BAT, right? And another aspect has always been prices that are reasonable and attainable. Like anybody like me who has spent many years looking at classified ads, a car with a price that's double what it should be, that's just sort of sitting there, has always been just sort of frustrating and a waste of everybody's time. So we get asked about that all the time. And early on in BAT, one of the reasons to list a car that was, or feature a car that was listed on Craigslist or elsewhere, it's oh wow, and the price is not crazy, right? That was refreshing. That would make it a special car that you actually want to talk about, and somebody would go buy. So there's a lot of sort of vetting that goes into it in terms of what makes things special, but there's always been these sort of key attributes of a car. The price has to be reasonable, so the seller actually wants to sell it. It needs to be, special in a way that it kind of sets itself apart. Because, I mean, look at the internet. How many cars are on the internet, right? There's thousands, there's hundreds of thousands, there's, I don't know, maybe millions of cars that are listed for sale at any one time on the internet. And 99% of those are sort of mind numbing and not ones that you would care about or want to look at. But there's that special sliver of ones that are based on a number of metrics of, rarity, cool factor, attainable price, sort of special attributes. You mentioned like the 240Z that we have. And so, I mean, just cool cars that have an appeal. And those are the kinds of things that we want to feature. So the curation of that is super important.
You went from cars that were generally affordable to listing a LaFerrari on the site. How did that happen, and how did that make you feel? Because I feel like that is a milestone to have $1 million car on your auction. I know that you guys had some cars that were close, but there's something special about a LaFerrari, obviously. Was there elation? Was there any feeling at all? Or was it just a part of kind of what you guys are doing and you're like, it's just another day at the office?
No, that's a great question. That was a milestone. That is certainly not another day at the office. That was a crazy day. If you look at the view count, which we make public, and the watcher count on that listing, that was a milestone listing. And it's certainly the highest dollar value of bids that we've ever had on the site. But yeah, I mean, many people like really high-end cars and high-dollar cars. And a question we get all the time is like, what's the most expensive car on BAT and that sort of thing. But that seller, honestly, that was their second car on the site. A lot of people don't know that it's a dealer, and they had listed a really nice car previous to that, and it went really well for them. If somebody just wandered in the door and we'd never heard of them before and they said, hey, I got a LaFerrari, can we post it up? That would be a little bit more, more tricky, but it's a very interesting model. And obviously there's a sort of value for them in the marketplace, and everybody knew that it would get some serious bids. And BAT is capable of listing and, I believe, transacting cars at that level, particularly when you look at the fees, right? I mean, we cap our fees at $5,000 on that car, and that car would have had hundreds of thousands, not exaggerating at all, hundreds of thousands of dollars in fees if it was transacted in another major auction venue. So anyway, that was a fun experience. But like I say, it's all about the mix, right? Like right after that $3 million car, we had a $10,000 Volvo sell, and the buyer is stoked, right? So it's cool to be able to kind of do both and to frankly experiment and push the limits. Something we've always done is experiment and try new things and see what will work. And that was one of those experiments.
I want to ask you a question that my business brain will not let me drop. Your fee structure is unlike most auction houses. I actually have no clue if anyone has a similar model to you. You cap the fees, and whenever you look at auction houses and auctions, you see the fees that are associated with the sales, and they're insane. Hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially, depending on the price of the car. But you didn't do that. You capped them, like I said. So why did you decide on the capped fee model?
That was very intentional, and it's something that stems partly from my sort of distaste for high fee models. And it also stems from the internet and what I believe customers want, right? Like customers want low price. The internet is all about efficiency, right? Get in an auction, the best thing you can do from a buyer and seller transaction perspective is have as many people see it as possible and have the fees as lean as they can be. That's how you optimize transactions online. It's like sort of an Amazon model. And just big services that take a huge chunk of a fee. Like, I don't know if you bought a house ever and you'd like see the real estate agent drive down the road in their Lexus and take like a 5-digit fee for the transaction that they facilitated, 6% or whatever it is. Like I've always liked things that it seemed like the fee was low or was fair to low as opposed to really high. And the car world and the auction world, I grew up in NorCal, as you have said, and going to Monterey and sitting in the audience at auctions there since I was a little kid. And for whatever reason, I would drive my, $10,000 car to go see the auction, and then a car would go across the block and the fees were like 4 times the price of my car. forget the car, right? It was like the fees were like, I would never even attain the fees. So I was just left a sour taste. I was like, that seems nuts that this is there's so many fees involved in this transaction. I was like, I just sort of bristled at that, and have always felt that way. And so I, have gotten this chance to, like I said, sort of whiteboard the concept. And I would rather have auctions have a very lean fee and be done in an efficient manner, as opposed to me in buying a car having to pay for the shiny catalogs and the stage lighting. Like, I would rather get the car for a deal, So anyway, so that we sort of built it like that. It also works really well with the internet, like what I'm talking about. I mean, internet is meant to be high volume, low price. That's basically what people want. And also the ability to use credit cards is important online, we believe. That's how we do a lot of the fee structure and such. And you're not going to go slide your credit card for a $150,000 fee at RM. It doesn't work that way. And so we have made it very credit card friendly, very customer friendly, and easy to use.
You mentioned RM and Sotheby's, and I feel like with the big auction houses, especially when it comes to cars, you have this spectacle that you're going to. It's almost more about the auction and less about the car in some instances. The internet obviously can't provide that, so it's really easy to get bored. And yes, there's some excitement about the auction, but it's obviously not the same experience. There's not as much excitement. So how did you guys counteract that? Because the site is clearly generating a lot of excitement and it's addictive. So how did you guys program that in, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. There is a sort of specialness to it, and we create that environment through a more thorough description of the car and a compelling gallery of the car, and that discussion. Like, if there's something you want to buy and there's 20 people at that moment that are talking about that item, that's a very interesting conversation to tap into, whether you're a spectator or you actually want to engage and talk. So that we have crafted and curated that sort of experience to be really engaging. And I mean, you talk about other big tent auctions sort of creating an environment. And, there's the sophisticated one we were talking about with RM. And then, I mean, you talk about sort of the Barrett-Jackson environment, which is more of literally like a circus, right? I mean, there's neon lights everywhere and people screaming and alcohol everywhere, and like crazy things are going on and mobs of people. I don't know if you've ever attended that, but everybody should probably do it once in their life. They create an environment that they think bodes well, obviously, for their business model and whatever environment they want to create. But I don't think that any of those environments, though they may appeal to different sorts of people, are necessarily great for the transacting as the buyer of a car, right? There's the best thing that you can have is a informed decision of what the car is and an availability of the seller and a fair price. As a buyer, that's what you want, right? You want the seller to be transparent. You want the car to be clear what you're getting, and you want a good price. And so we have been able to engineer a system, and you want convenience, right? Everybody wants convenience in their life. So like ours, you can sit on and have your iPhone. You're in the line at the grocery store or at lunch or wherever. And, oh, look, I bought a vintage car that I've been watching. Or we'll send you an SMS and remind you that your dream car is ending in 30 minutes, right? I mean, that sort of stuff is super cool. And you're right. You key in on a good thing. It's very different than, swanky leather seats at the tent with the blue mood lighting and like the person with the dreamy voice, like introducing the car. I mean, that stuff has its place, and a lot of people like that environment, and they have a very loyal following. But when it comes to creating a highly functional and high satisfaction environment for buying a car, it's more the attributes that I was talking about and I think they can scale and reach farther given their sort of digital and internet nature as well. So I think it makes it better.
Your company is growing. You're past 20 employees. That's wonderful. What is the process of getting new quality people into the door of BAT and making sure that they fit in with you guys?
No, we are growing, and adding people and adding the right people has been sort of my task, frankly, to build out the team and to do that in a way where it's just a culture where people want to be there and want to be involved, right? I mean, I love working at BMW, great company, but thousands of employees, right? I don't know if you've been at huge companies or small companies. They both have their positives and negatives, but we knew this is sort of starting from small. It's going to be a smaller, more tight-knit group. And just I've always wanted to work someplace where like you love going to work every day, and there's both cool people, but a good environment and a lot of positivity and encouragement and teamwork. And I mean, it thankfully has been able to grow at a pace where we could be very careful about the people that we add and try to do things in a way that it just makes it an enjoyable environment. And so we're a small team. We're a little office here. We're jammed into this little office at the Mission, but we're having a lot of fun with it. It's still enjoyable. And even here, years on, finding automotive people, I sort of call them that, but they come from many different backgrounds, right? Guys that are working for BAT, many of them have come out of other jobs where it was what you're talking about, right? It's like a law office with cubicles and everything's painted beige, and it's just sort of like, oh gosh, like what's happening? And some of them came out of car background. Some of them have come out of, nonprofit sector. I mean, you'd almost never guess like all the backgrounds people come out of, but the thing that ties them together is they're like, hey, BAT is cool, and I see that it's growing. I want to be part of something that's sort of changing the automotive space, and they bring skills, a variety of skill sets from different backgrounds for the kind of things we need. So it's been fun to assemble this team.
So I want to circle back a little bit and kind of go back to you. You have had quite a few cars that you've posted on your Instagram, and I've Googled you and pictures of you standing next to a variety of different cars, and one pops up consistently because it sounds like it's a project that you're working on right now. I know that I say project because most cars are projects to really passionate car owners, and that's the lime green 240Z. So talk to me a little bit about why you bought that car, how you bought that car. Maybe it was even on BAT, and maybe you're even looking at buying cars on BAT. So give me a little bit of a background on the story behind that car.
I'm happy to. I love that car. Just drove it yesterday. It's a special little 73 240Z. And that's just a model that I've always liked ever since I was a kid. I'd never owned a Datsun before. And those things are just, they're going up in value. So I didn't want them to get too expensive before we could get our hands on one. But the first generation of the 240, of the Z car is the 240, and it's low and it's clean, and the design was really groundbreaking, and it's got a big 6-cylinder in it, and it's fast, and it came in wacky colors. And that was one of the other reasons for buying that one. And so we are very lucky here. I mean, you talk about Bay Area car culture. One of the best, if not the best, Datsun workshop in the entire country is Z Car Garage, owned by Rob Fuller in San Jose, not far from where I grew up. And I had always known about that shop and him for a bunch of years. And, when you buy an old car, you're not only just buying it, but you're hopefully going to have some sort of local resource for how to get it fixed if you can't fix it yourself. Thankfully, a lot of my cars I am able to work on myself and fix things up. But when you have a shop like Z Car Garage right in your backyard, it's like this is a great resource. So I knew that I wanted one of those eventually, and we came up with a plan to, I don't know if you saw the story on the website, but we actually bought that car to drive it across the country to a Nissan sponsored event in Nashville and Atlanta, and bought the car, and 5 days after buying it, jumped in it and drove it 5,000 miles across the country via a crazy route. And that car, it's just such a neat car. And I mean, if you go to BAT and you search 240Z, you'll see we've we've listed many of these cars because there are a ton of people that like them and are restoring them now and making them really great. And this was just sort of right place, right time. And it worked with this neat plan to go across the country. And I got to drive it on windy roads from Nissan headquarters in Nashville out to Road Atlanta and take it around the track for a couple laps at Road Atlanta. And then we shipped it back here and are playing with it. It's actually going to Baja, Mexico in 2 weeks to run in an event with some BAT employees in it. That's another perk at BAT, by the way, is driving a lot of fun cars and having a good time with them.
Randy, it was such a pleasure to sit down and talk to you and learn about BAT and how it all got started and to hear your story. Thank you so much for taking the time out.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I like your questions, and it's always fun to talk about BAT and the beginnings, which were pretty fun times. And now we tend to talk about the future more and where it's headed and where it's going to go, and that's fun too. So thanks for all the great questions.
The Road Stories podcast is recorded, mixed, and produced by Michael Senderovich. Original music is provided by Clarence in the Road Stories project. You can find more music by Clarence by going to soundcloud.com/Clarence Los Angeles. If you like this podcast, please leave us a review. It helps the show greatly. Thanks so much for listening.